Hello Traveler, and welcome to the Invokation Akademy Review Session for version 4.5. The last version was quite a wild ride. Without any adjustments to Gilded Dreams, the magic engine continued to be the dominant strategy for most decks, even being combined with Jet to create some truly absurd combo decks towards the later half of the patch. Well, the new cards and balance changes have been announced, so today I'll be going through my first impressions on them to try and predict what the upcoming metagame has in store. As usual, the new character showcase will be coming in a later video once I've had a chance to play with the cards. And with the stage set, let's start with the balance changes to existing cards, starting with the one on everyone's mind, Gilded Dreams, which got two important adjustments this patch. First, the cost goes from 3 unaligned to 3 aligned dice. This is a pretty huge nerf, as 3 unaligned meant you could always play Gilded no matter what, but now you have to risk potentially keeping off element dice in order to play it if you need to. Basically, what this does is make Gilded harder to use for decks that would try and rely on it for fixing to enable, for instance, a double skill on round 1. The best example would be Finale, Fischl Nahida Linny. This deck was already starting to get played a little bit less towards the end of version 4.4, so I can definitely see this nerf being the final nail in the coffin and knock Finale off of the top of the metagame, as it does hurt its round 1 consistency quite a lot. But one thing this change doesn't do is fix any of the unfair ways to use Gilded at all. Cards like Yayoi and Liaisong will still provide the discount to Gilded without issue. I mean, if you're playing Gilded for 1, then there's really no difference between unaligned and aligned dice, which means any decks that were using this mostly for dice generation, like the now infamous Jet Freeze OTK deck, are barely going to be impacted at all by this change. The second change is a little less significant, with the dice generation on play going from 1 Omni and 1 element of the equipped character to just 2 elements of the equipped character. This is still relevant because occasionally you'll see decks play Gilded on an inactive character to generate an extra Omni to fix for the active character, while ensuring Gilded is equipped to someone that can make use of the draw later on with reactions. This change basically shuts that option off, which does reduce the flexibility of the card somewhat, but overall you're still generating 2 dice, so it's not a huge deal for most decks. While this nerf is certainly going to affect the usage of Gilded and have it played less, I personally really dislike this change. To me, decks that played Gilded as a dice fixer and to enable card draw was a good use for the card, allowing you to get around some bad RNG at the good cost of 1 die. The only reason Gilded is so problematic is because we have other cards like Yayoi and zero cost artifacts that make it too easy to abuse it for dice generation, which is largely going to be unaffected by the nerfs. Unfortunately, I think all this change is going to do is push Gilded to feel even worse to play by making it either completely busted by generating a ton of dice or totally unplayable because you don't have the right dice to play it, and removing all of the extra play of it in between. Overall, this definitely will hit the consistency of any decks running Gilded, but I don't actually see it being played any less due to these nerfs. Next up is perhaps the most topical card since the beginning of the game, Jade Chamber. New players have always loved playing this card even back when it cost 1 and then it was buffed to 0 cost, which should have been a pretty clear sign it isn't as good as you might think. Well, it's back again with another buff. It still has its usual effect, but now additionally has the ability that if at the start of your turn you have 3 or less cards in hand, it will be discarded and generate an Omni die. Note that since this happens after the die roll, on the turn that it does discard, you still get the 2 guaranteed dice from it. Also, to start the turn with 3 or less cards means you'll have to end the previous turn with only 1 card in hand because you are going to draw 2. Okay, interestingly enough, I've seen some comments saying that this is a nerf as discarding it means you'll no longer give you fixing, but let me assure you that this is most certainly a positive, not a negative. Being able to generate an Omni die, especially when your hand is very small, is way more powerful than the first effect, and I would even prefer this if it didn't have the 3 or less condition and just discarded right away. But whether you agree with that or not, do note that this does slightly change how you want to use Jade Chamber. Rather than providing you with long-term fixing, it instead is better at giving you 1 very powerful turn by not only fixing 2 of your die, but adding an extra Omni as well. Still, having 3 or less cards in your hand is a pretty steep condition and usually isn't a good sign if that's happening. But with this change, I could see playing Jade Chamber in very aggressive decks that do like to play out their hand very fast in rounds 1 or 2 and then setting up for a big round 2 or 3. So it's actually worth exploring, but I'll be honest, I don't actually still have high hopes for it, and I still think you probably should avoid playing Jade Chamber, but I've been saying that for a while and it doesn't seem to have helped. Okay, well, for anyone that thinks Jade Chamber is ruined with the new ability, luckily the buff to Favonius Library will hopefully come to your rescue. It has its cost adjusted down from 1 to 0, which is actually a really big deal, and it's very likely to replace Toss-Up in most decks. To put some math in perspective, an extra reroll is equivalent to about 1 die of fixing, so by being 0 cost, playing it now is as good as tuning the card, but has the upside of giving you more rerolls indefinitely. And believe it or not, in most cases, that extra reroll is about the same amount of fixing you would have got from Jade Chamber. So if you're upset about the Jade Chamber change, just go over to playing Favonius Library. In fact, because Favonius Library does give you that reroll right away, while Jade Chamber always has a delay, it is probably better in most cases. Though in reality, the real answer in the end is, despite both these buffs, you probably still shouldn't be playing either of them, and instead rely on card draw to do your fixing. If you want to learn more why that is, I highly recommend you check out the TCG one-on-one video on how to beat bad RNG, as new players often approach the die roll in the wrong way. But that is it for the balance changes. So, onto the new cards, starting with the new Arcane Day of Resistance Moment of Shattered Dreams. When played on a character, each instance of incoming damage will be reduced by 1 up to a max of 4 times. This is actually a pretty interesting card. Being able to absorb 4 damage for 0 dice is actually really powerful. Think about comparing this to Lotus, which is 1 dice for 3 damage. But this can even stack on top of food as well. Of course, to get the full effect, you do have to be hit 4 times in the same round, so there's probably 2 main uses for this. One is going to be against combo decks like Yilan OTK, and you can play it on a character to help you survive their combo turn where they would normally sweep your entire team. Playing it at the right time could easily deny them of something like a Gambler's Trigger that would have helped them snowball and continue their combo, taking out your entire team. So this could be a nice tech card for stall decks to help with combo matchups. Combo decks too will often deal their damage in multiple hits, so it's actually very easy to get the maximum value out of this card. It really plays a pretty similar role to Passing of Judgment, which has started gaining popularity. The other use for this could actually be in combo decks themselves to protect a key character from first turn kills, once again like Yilan, but can apply to other characters like Bennett or Raiden. In the current meta, there aren't that many decks with first turn kill potential, so it's probably not going to be used for that all that much, but if it ever does, it would be a nice option. In the end, I do think how good this card is going to depend very heavily on the metagame, as it shines in certain matchups and is mostly useless in others. There's definitely some potential here, but it will have to be in the right metagame. Tome of Eternal Flow is a new catalyst which gives +1 damage, and once a round, if the character has been damaged or healed 2 times, will buff the next attack by +2 damage. As Nouvelette's signature weapon, it's definitely set up to take advantage of his kit the most, and is probably the only character that this is going to synergize with for now. So you can definitely try it if you're planning to build a Nouvelette deck. Golden Troops Reward is a 0 cost artifact that does nothing right away, but at the end of each turn does build up stacks to a max of 2, provided that the character it's equipped to is on standby. Then, the next time the character uses a talent or elemental skill will discount it by the same number of stacks. As I pointed out with its predecessors Flowing Rings and Cavarina, 0 cost artifacts shouldn't be underestimated, and they always end up being way better than they look, and this one already looks incredibly good. While the effect is delayed, it's really easy to just get 1 die out of this, and that's really all you need, but sometimes if you draw it early enough, it can give you 2. Not only that, it slots perfectly into how Gilded Yayoi decks want to play, and honestly, this looks like it's going to make that strategy even stronger despite the Gilded nerfs. Plus, it's the perfect card to equip early and replace later to trigger something like War Princess. Honestly, I'm a little bit shocked that they'd make a card like this into the meta as it currently is, particularly with Gilded not being nerfed all that impactfully in decks where this is good as well. So be afraid, in 4.5 we might see Magic decks become even more dominant than they were before, particularly the aggressive ones. This is certainly going to be the best card added in 4.5, so keep an eye out for it. Fortress of Meropide is a new location card that gains stacks whenever your active character takes damage or is healed up to a max of 4. Then, at the start of any round, if you have reached 4 stacks, it will negate the first event card played by your opponent on that round and reset back to 0. Yep, this is like a mini Passing of Judgment. Keep in mind though, Fortress does stick around after it resets and will slowly start counting up back again as a repeatable effect. One thing to take note of though, if you have 2 of these on field and both trigger in the same round, one status will actually overwrite the other. You won't get 2 negations. So playing 2 at once is generally not advised, as at some point they'll probably sync up and conflict with each other. As for how good it is, well first you'd probably only want to consider this in a stall deck that has plenty of healing, as if you're not already healing your characters, it's going to be too slow. However, if you can reliably heal 1 or 2 times a round, there's a good chance you can trigger this every single round, which is going to add up very quickly for your opponent. Though overall, this is much weaker than Passing of Judgment, as blocking only the first card is a lot worse than 3 at once, as each additional card negated does make it harder for your opponent to play around. It's much easier to play around Fortress by just throwing away a 0 cost that you don't need. It also takes up a support spot, which currently is quite a high premium and real cost. And do keep in mind it only tracks healing on the active character, so if you have a lingering effect like Mushroom Pizza that is healing off field, it's not going to add stacks. Still, this is a really interesting card. I'm definitely going to be trying it out in stall decks, which is where it's going to excel. Lumenstone Adjuvant is a new item that after playing your third card for a round, will draw 1 card and create 1 Omni Die up to a total of 3 times. There's a few important things to keep in mind. First, an action card just means any card at all, not to be confused with Fortress and Judgment that only care about event cards. Second, unlike cards like Jet or Silver and Malus, this will only start counting once it's on the field. So on the turn you play it, you have to play another 3 cards to trigger it. It doesn't count itself or anything before. If you add up the total value, 3 cards and 3 dice for 2 cost, it's a pretty good deal, but having to play 3 cards around is actually a lot harder than it sounds. So you really can't be playing this in any deck. It may have some potential in decks that are very good at drawing cards, so you can continue playing 3 cards every round, or have a lot of 0 cost plays, which probably means combo. But because it only triggers once a round, it means you pretty much need to draw this and play it round 1, otherwise it's going to be way too slow. Overall, not a card I'm really excited about, but hey, maybe not the worst thing to get off of an early Sunyata. Last, we have Controlled Directional Blast, which has a really peculiar condition of only being playable with 4 total cards across both your opponent's support and summon zone. Since it counts the total, you could have, for example, 3 supports, 1 summon, or 2 supports, 2 summons. When played, all summons, including yours, will lose 1 usage. Okay, the immediate comparison is of course to Send Off, but this is way stronger. While it does have a condition, decks these days really have no trouble filling up the support zone with either companions or locations, and assuming you're already playing it when your opponent has at least 1 summon out, you only need them to have 3 supports, and anytime this hits 2 or more summons is going to be backbreaking for the opponent. Any summon heavy deck is going to have a really hard time beating this card. If the Gilded nerf wasn't enough to take out Finale, then this card certainly is going to be, as removing Oz and Prop Arrow is going to deny a lot of damage. While this card is very powerful, I'm actually not a big fan of them adding it into the pool, just because of how good it is against summon strategies, which competitively we're already seeing not much play. Even if you just hit 1 summon with it, it's still worth it because it only costs 1. And that's it for the new cards. Between the balance changes and the new action cards, I've gotta say I really don't like the direction this patch is heading, particularly for competitive play. The Gilded change really doesn't look like it's going to have that huge of an impact, and in fact they might have just made Magic even more oppressive with Golden Troop being added. Not only that, Controlled Directional Blast could really hurt deck diversity by punishing summon decks too heavily when they were already on the edges of the meta. Well, in the end, we'll have to see how the metagame shakes out, and hopefully the new characters being added will add something to spice it up. But in the end, I think you can expect a pretty similar metagame than what we just had in 4.4. If you are a newer player, be sure to attend the TCG 101 series to level up your Genius Invocation game. If there's anything you'd like to see in an upcoming video, drop a comment and I'll see how I can help. Be sure to enroll in our courses by subscribing so you can be notified when a new lesson's available. Until then, class dismissed!